In the 2023 NBA playoffs, the Miami Heat have been like no other team. This 8 seed battling to the death just to get a spot in the playoffs has no business being in the NBA Finals. At first, the play-in game was called the race to see who would get stomped by Milwaukee, but that never happened. The Heat are having an extraordinary playoff run this year, but how does this playoff run compare to other historically great runs in the past? Is the 2023 Miami Heat really all that compared to other postseason runs? What the Miami Heat are doing now is pretty much unheard of in sports, but surprisingly, this isn't the only time this has happened. Throughout the history of the modern NBA, we've seen several underdogs with seemingly no chance of making the finals or even winning them shock the whole world. The first great example is the 1995 Houston Rockets, who were the 6th seed. During the trade deadline, the Rockets traded Ottis Thorpe away for Clyde Drexler. This trade was crucial because it put a complimentary guard around Hakeem, which was much needed at the time. And this move paid dividends come postseason time. The Rockets, as the 6th seed, beat the 3-seeded John Stockton and Karl Malone Utah Jazz 3-2. Hakeem and Clyde averaged a combined 60.2 points a game that series. Then they beat the 2-seeded Phoenix Suns with Charles Barkley and Kevin Johnson. Despite Kevin Johnson playing out of his mind this series, averaging 28 points a game on great efficiency compared to his measly 15 points a game in the regular season. The Rockets then beat the number 1 seeded David Robinson-led Spurs in 6 games. Finally, they beat the Orlando Magic in the NBA Finals 4-0. A Penny Hardaway and Shaq duo was inferior compared to Hakeem and Clyde. This 6th seed that no one expected to do anything beat all the odds by beating countless talented teams and won the NBA Finals. Another notable Cinderella run that happened was the 1999 New York Knicks. The 1999 season was a lockout year, so there was only 50 games played, but this didn't faze the Knicks one bit. In the first round, the New York Knicks, being the 8th seed, beat the 1-seeded Miami Heat 3-2, who played terrible in this series. Besides Alonzo Mourning, who did okay, Tim Hardaway and Dan Marley both were no-shows in this series. From there, they swept the 4-seeded Atlanta Hawks in the second round 4-0, who also shot the ball like crap. The Hawks as a team shot 31% from the field and 23% from 3. Steve Smith, their best player at the time, shot an abysmal 27% from the field this series. Next, they beat the 2-seeded Indiana Pacers 4-2. Reggie Miller didn't perform well in the series. He only shot about 36% from the field. Finally, in the NBA Finals, unfortunately, this Cinderella run came to an end because they got destroyed by the San Antonio Spurs in the finals, losing 4-1. These are just a couple examples of notable playoff runs from recent NBA history. But which one is the best? I mean, they're all great, but which specific singular playoff run in modern NBA history can we truly say is superior compared to the rest? If only we had some sort of way, some sort of stat to figure this out. Lucky for you, this is exactly what we're going to find out. We're going to use a combination of some important stats to truly find out who had the greatest playoff run ever. One of the most important aspects in determining the magnitude of a team's playoff run is how good of teams they played against on their way to a championship. A playoff run means nothing if you played against the 7th grade rec league teams to win. From the years 1980 to 2022, I found the combined SRS scores from each championship winning team's opponents. SRS, or simple rating score, is a stat that determines how good you are based off your margin of victory and strength of schedule. So, for example, the 2016 Cleveland Cavs beat the Pistons, the Hawks, the Raptors, and the Warriors, giving them a combined score of 18.38. The score measures the competition they had to get through. Based off these numbers, some teams that played against the hardest competition in the playoffs were the 1995 Houston Rockets, the 2001 LA Lakers, and the 1997 Chicago Bulls. Some teams that played against the least competition were the 1987 Lakers, the 1988 Lakers, and the 2020 Lakers. The average score for competition is 13.9, but we're missing a crucial component to this equation. The teams we mentioned in the beginning of the video were all high-seeded teams. They weren't expected to win at all. An important part we're forgetting is how well a team did in the postseason in regards to their own record. A 1 seed going to the NBA Finals is like another day in the office, but an 8 seed going to the NBA Finals is like spotting a blue moon. Some of the highest ranked teams of all time based off of SRS are the 1996 Chicago Bulls, the 2017 Warriors, and the 1997 Bulls, Bet you didn't expect that one. Some of the lowest ranked championship teams are the 1995 Houston Rockets, the 2001 Lakers, and the 2006 Heat. Championships come in different shapes and sizes, but if we combine the previous two stats together, the teams that played the hardest competition and didn't have the highest ranking, this stat is called the adjusted SRS. I'll give you an example of how we solved for this. The 2016 Cleveland Cavs played against the Pistons, Hawks, Raptors, and Warriors, who had a combined score of 18.38. The Cleveland Cavs that year had an SRS of 5.45. To solve for adjusted SRS, you take the opponent's strength, so 18.38, minus the Cavs SRS, so 5.45, and you multiply that by 4 because there were 4 playoff series. That would give them a score of negative 3.42, and this would rank Cleveland 7th of 43 different teams. Some of the best scores of adjusted SRS came from the 1995 Rockets, who were a 6th seed who won the NBA Finals, the 2001 Lakers, who played against some of the hardest competition and weren't ranked as high as many people think, and the 1994 Rockets, who also played against hard teams while not being over the top great. For reference, teams that broke even with adjusted SRS means that they had to play on average better teams than themselves in order to come out victorious. The opposite is true with negative signs by their numbers. This means that teams had to play against worse teams than themselves on average to win. So in a way, this kind of punishes the best teams in the league for being so good and rewarding the high-seeded teams for being terrible. But you're supposed to win as a 1 seed and you're supposed to lose in the first round as a high seed. That's what makes the high-seeded playoff run so great. But wait, there is one more missing part of this puzzle. What makes the 2001 Lakers playoff run so special was how they ruthlessly dominated their competition. They had a playoff run of 16-1. They were undefeated until Allen Iverson gave them their first loss in the finals. Considering at what magnitude did these championship teams dominate, it is an essential detail to account for. Some teams with the best win rates in the playoffs are the 2017 Warriors, 2001 Lakers, and 1983 Philadelphia 76ers. Now, to answer our original question, what team had the greatest playoff run ever? With accounting for a team's level of competition, level of themselves, and level in which they dominated their competition, we can finally come to a conclusion. The 1995 Houston Rockets indeed had the greatest, hardest, and most impressive playoff run, with a score of 10.01. A 6th seed that had to go through hell and back just to come out victorious on the other side. On this graph, the yellow dots represent a negative score, and the blue dots represent a positive score. There were 4 teams of the 43 competitors that finished with a positive number. The 1995 Rockets, the 2001 Lakers, the 1994 Rockets, and the 2011 Mavs. These teams redefined the odds despite not being the favorite to win it all, despite playing against hard teams, dominated their competition, and achieved some of the most impressive rings ever won. Of course, a ring is a ring, but not all rings are built the same. Let's add some other teams to the mix now. Some other notable playoff runs that didn't quite win a championship are the 1999 Knicks and the 2020 Miami Heat. How do those teams compare to the pack? The 8-seeded 1999 New York Knicks have a score of 5.46, putting them at 2nd place all time. The 5-seeded NBA bubble Miami Heat have a score of 6.83, putting them at 2nd place, ahead of the Knicks, but still behind the 95 Rockets. How do teams in this year's playoffs rank though? The Celtics' playoff run was pretty average, scoring them negative 13.11, putting them around the middle of the pack. The LA Lakers this year finished with an impressive score of 2.93, placing them comfortably within the top 5 all time. Now here's where it really gets good. Let's look at the 2 teams that are still alive this year, the Denver Nuggets and Miami Heat. Because we don't right now know how this series will pan out, these 2 teams will get ranges of scores. Hypothetically speaking, if the Nuggets swept the Heat in 4 games, they would have a score of negative 4.14. If they beat the Heat in 7 games, they would have a score of 4.8. A 5 or 6 game victory would be a number in between these two. Let's look at it from the Heat's perspective now. If the Heat lost in the NBA Finals, they would have a playoff run of 8.91. Purely based off of what happened in the Eastern Conference, the Heat already have the 2nd greatest playoff run of all time, only behind the 1995 Houston Rockets. If the Miami Heat won the NBA Finals in 7 games, they would have a score of 10.59. Now, if the Heat swept the Nuggets, they would have a score of 12.03. Both of these scores would cement the 2023 Miami Heat as the greatest playoff run of all time. Of the 43 years we studied, we've only seen 4 teams have a positive playoff run score. That's about 9% of the underdogs coming from the bottom and shocking the whole world. Over 43 years, we've only seen a team with a double-digit playoff run score one time. One time. That's about a 2% chance the stars align, where a severe underdog plays the hardest teams and ruthlessly dominates. In the 2023 playoffs, we've had the chance of witnessing the impossible, the 2%. People don't realize how incredibly rare this is to see. The Miami Heat have redefined the odds. They're making history right in front of our eyes. To call this an upset would be a huge understatement. Hundreds of 8 seeds have tried, only 2 have made the finals, and 0 have won a championship. The Heat have a chance to do something very special this year.